Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited to kick off our 35th anniversary event with this really special interview. I'm Nikki Wayment. I'm the current Executive Director of HawkWatch International, which feels a little weird to say when I'm looking at the face of the founder of HawkWatch International, my friend Steve Hoffman. So I'm really excited to share the interview that Steve and I recorded a couple of weeks ago. It's always a thrill for me when I get to spend time with him and reminisce with him and learn from him, as I'm sure probably everyone on this call has at some point in time. So again, we're really thrilled that you're here to celebrate our 35th anniversary with us. I hope that you enjoy the video. I hope you have a few questions for Steve at the end. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time. This is obviously a big year for us. And if you feel inclined to make a donation, we would certainly appreciate it. You can donate to HawkWatch by visiting our website, hawkwatch.org, or you can text HawkWatch to 56651 and make a donation that way. So thanks so much. Enjoy the interview.
So Steve, I think anyone who's been involved at HawkWatch International for any period of time has heard some version of your origin story. Coming to Utah State to get your master's degree, kind of wandering into the Wellsvilles, discovering Raptors and looking for that place. But why don't we just take a second and get the story straight from the horse's mouth? Tell us why you started HawkWatch, what it was about Utah and this landscape.
Okay. Well, actually, it started well ahead of that. As a freshman college student at Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania, I was 25 miles from the most famous place in the world for watching migrating hawks, a place called Hawk Mountain, which I had never been there before. But I was taking a freshman introductory biology class, and our professor offered a optional field trip on a Sunday to Hawk Mountain in late September 1969. And I took advantage of that. I went up there with some of my classmates, and it was a spectacular day at Hawk Mountain. We saw over 4,000 hawks, some 13 species, all of them eye level or below within a couple hundred feet. And at that moment in time, I fell in love with raptors. I became addicted. And I used to go back again and again to Hawk Mountain throughout my college years. And then I went out to grad school at Utah State. And I really missed Hawk Mountain.
Yeah.
Fall wasn't fall without watching a few hawks migrate. At that point, it was all about the passion for watching the birds effortlessly fly south and just enjoying it. And so I started climbing mountains around Utah State University and eventually made it up to the Wellsvilles and saw a major flyway right there in front of my eyes. And the other really important aspect of this is Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, which I read in high school. But she made the case against DDT and other organochlorine pesticides, partly in her book, by referring to the data gathered at Hawk Mountain since 1934, and which showed severe declines in bald eagles, ospreys, peregrine falcons, and a number of other raptor species from the late 40s into the 50s and 60s, and the book was published in 62. So, of course, her book, many people believe, is the beginning of the modern environmental movement in this country. And led to a lot of the environmental laws, Endangered Species Act, National Environmental Policy Act, and so on. And that sort of connection that she made for me in terms of raptors being outstanding environmental indicators and migration being perhaps the best way to monitor the birds over large landscapes, and sort of using it as an indicator of ecosystem health and ecosystem change. That really inspired me to think about the fact that there was all this data being gathered in the east at places like Hawk Mountain, Cape May, Duluth, Minnesota, so many other places in the east and Midwest, Great Lakes, Atlantic coastline, Appalachian ridges. There was a big hole in Western North America. No one had ever studied raptor migration in the West. In fact, nobody even knew if raptors, migrated or not. They had just never been investigated. So I realized that there's a contribution to be made here in terms of filling this gap in our understanding of raptor migration and the health and trends of raptor populations in all of Western North America. It was a big empty map. If you look at all the sites, there aren't any. There were not any. So I just had to fill that gap. I felt like an organization was needed because it needed to be done in a sustainable way. We needed a sustainable organization to make this their mission.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it filled that personal gap for you too of missing fall migration of raptors.
Yeah. Yeah, it was first about me enjoying the birds, and then later I realized, hey, there's some real value, scientific value, conservation value to this information.
So great. I love that story. You originally, when you came to go to Utah State, go Aggies, I went to Utah State also, you were just interested in studying carnivores, right? It wasn't specifically raptors in the early days.
Actually, I ended up studying coyotes. And I actually, in all my graduate school applications, I said, avian or mammalian predators is what I wanted to study for my master's degree. And I ended up, studying coyotes at Utah State.
I'm not sure how many people know that when HawkWatch International started, that it wasn't actually called HawkWatch International and it wasn't in Utah. So can you share with everybody where the original name came from, how it changed, and where you actually started doing laying the groundwork for starting HawkWatch International?
Sure. Well, at the time I realized I wanted to start the organization, I was in 1986, I had thought about it for years, but in 1986, I made the decision I really want to get a nonprofit going devoted to filling this gap in Western hawk migration knowledge and understanding. So I was working as an endangered species specialist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of the Regional Fish and Wildlife Service office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so that's where I started the organization. And of course, I was not particularly creative in coming up with a name for the organization. And so I was trying to just be descriptive as to what we're all about. And so the first name for the organization was the Western Foundation for Raptor Conservation, which is a mouthful. And abbreviation WFRC sounded like an Eastern radio station. So over time, we realized for marketing purposes and for visibility for the organization, we needed a catchy name. And one of my board members at the time, Alan Hale, who actually ran Butte Books, a natural history bookstore back in Virginia, was on my board. And he actually helped with the counts back in the Manzanos in 1985.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he had a strong connection and to me and to the organization, and served on the board for many years. And he came up with the name HawkWatch International, and I just loved it instantaneously. And the board liked it, and in 1990, we changed the name. I, for years, ran the organization out of Albuquerque. But, I just didn't like the fact that it wasn't in the geographic center of all of our field projects, and it wasn't very close to our largest, most important migration site, which was the Ghost Chutes.
Yeah.
So in 1993, I made the decision to move the organization from Albuquerque to Salt Lake City. And so we made the big move, but we kept a satellite office for many years in Albuquerque. And so that's really what happened in the early years, yeah.
That's such a fun story. We actually kept the satellite office running until just recently when Bobby wasn't able to do it anymore. So Bobby was with you in the early days, right? Bobby Posey, she helped kind of filled the front office.
She was the administrator out of the Albuquerque office for many, many years, and she did a great job.
Yeah.
So warm and friendly and knowledgeable about our programs, too.
Yeah. We were joking the other day about Bobby Treats and how anyone who's worked at the Manzanos has been the lucky recipient of the Bobby treats that go up to the site at the beginning of the season. She was such a gracious and
she was a mother
loving
hen
person.
to all the young field people.
Yeah.
She mothered everybody.
She did. She was definitely one of a kind. She definitely advocated for them and made sure that they had what they needed, and she was such a great addition to our team forever. You've talked a little bit already about why you felt like there was this big hole in the West, but why is studying migration still so important all these years later?
Well, first of all, I think you have to get back to the concept of the fact that raptors are extremely valuable environmental barometers. And so how can we take advantage of that opportunity? Because if you actually go out and try to find nesting raptors, they're widely scattered, low densities, their nests are hard to find. It would be incredibly labor intensive and costly and impossible to do on a large scale. But the migration opportunity is so unique because these birds do tend to, they're looking for updrafts as they migrate. They want to save energy, so they concentrate along mountaintop ridges to get the updrafts and conserve energy. They also concentrate along coastlines like the Great Lakes coastline, the Atlantic coastline, the Pacific coastline, and because they don't want to fly over large bodies of water. It's too dangerous for them. So here's the opportunity to look at more than a dozen species of raptors, which occupy a vast part of North America, and all combined, they basically occupy every major habitat type, terrestrial habitat type in North America. So we're monitoring all these different species and over a large landscape from one point. I just thought if we could find enough sites in the West, we could really make a huge difference in understanding what's going on in the interior western part of the continent, in addition to what we already know from studies at Hawk Mountain and Cape May, New Jersey, and other places in the eastern part of the country.
Yeah. We like to call the migration network the early warning system.
Yeah.
Right? It's alerting us to that early shift in a downward trend especially, but also in an upward trend. And that's one of the things that I love about migration in our network is that all the stories that come out of it aren't bad or sad, right? There's also really great things that come out. Seeing the rebound of the peregrine falcon is the perfect example. Yeah,
and the rebound of bald eagles and and a number of other species that were affected by DDT.
Yeah, so it's a really, I agree, it's a really wonderful way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with populations across
and
North
that
America.
Realization came to me really through Rachel Carson in Silent Spring, because she used that migration data to make her case against DDT. And how much longer would it have taken us to understand that problem if we were not counting hawks on a regular basis, daily, every fall from 1934 to the present at a place like Hawk Mountain?
So you talked about going up to the Wellsvilles and seeing this like great flyway, and in the early days, people not even really knowing what raptors were doing in the West. So one of my favorite parts of the story is that there were actually scientists, trained scientists in the West who didn't think that raptors migrated in Western North America. So how did you prove them wrong?
Well, basically, after I finished the first full season of counting in the Wellsvilles in 1977, I then presented a scientific paper at the Cooper Ornithological Society in May of 1978 with the first findings of raptor migration counts in the interior of Western North America ever. And there were several, academics and raptor specialists, scientists, PhD professors from BYU and other places in the audience. And after my talk, they came up to me and they said, we don't believe a word of what you're saying here. You could just be counting resident birds flying in circles around the mountain. And the only way that we will believe you is if you start abandoning station and you actually keep catching unmarked, unbanded birds, and then we'll know these are transients. But until you prove that to us through a banding program, we're not going to believe that you're seeing all these migrating. And particularly, they were amazed that I would count so many golden eagles. And the Wellsvilles is a pretty good golden eagle flyway. And I was counting hundreds. And this guy, Joe Murphy, was studying golden eagles in the West Desert of Utah, and he was banding all the chicks, and none of them ever migrated. They were all local birds, and they would disperse 50 or 100 miles from where they were fledged, but they never made long distance movements. But and most of the golden eagles that come through the Rocky Mountain West actually originate from the far north. You know, Canadian Rockies, the Northwest Territories of Canada and Alaska, all the way to the Brooks Range of northern Alaska. So just because they don't migrate, the resident birds in western Utah don't migrate, doesn't mean the birds from the Arctic don't migrate.
Right.
There's nothing for them to eat in the winter. They got to migrate.
Yeah, they don't have a choice.
Yeah. So basically that inspired me to find another site where I could set up a long-term banding effort to prove them wrong. And because it was logistically impossible to set up a banding station in the Wellsvilles. And that was the one known location at that point. So I started looking at maps and figuring out where there might be another flyway that would be suitable for setting up a large-scale banding operation to prove these people wrong, and that there is, in fact, a major migration of raptors through the interior western part of the continent. And that led me to the Ghost Chutes. And of course, you got the Great Salt Lake and the Bonneville Salt Flats, which actually create a tremendous barrier to raptor migration. The birds don't want to fly over the water. They don't want to fly over a blank space of hot, bare sand.
Right.
So they just steer around that, and the Ghost Chutes is the first major mountain range to the west of all that. That led me to set up a banding station there in first find the site and document the huge migration there, and then start banding the next year. And we started banding there in 1980. I actually didn't start standardized counts there until 1983. But in 1980, the banding started, and within a few years, we were realizing, hey, this is not only a flyway as significant as the Wellsvilles, but even more so. In fact, we did some comparison counts in the fall of 1979 and found that on average, 3.5 times as many birds flew through the Ghost Chutes as the Wellsvilles on any given day, on average. And that's exactly how the counts have turned out, with 3,000 to 5,000 birds in the Wellsvilles over the course of a season, and 15,000 to 25,000 birds being counted in the Ghost Chutes.
It's interesting. I think every one of our sites has something special about it, right? There's something kind of magical about being at each of those, but there's something extra special about the Ghost Chutes. And anyone who's ever been there, I think, says that. If it's the view or the porch or the people or just the wild feeling of it.
It's very isolated up there.
It is, absolutely.
And it's a tremendous view.
Yes.
And the view of the Bonneville Salt Flats is incredible. And plus, it is so productive in terms of capturing and banding large numbers of birds. I mean, our biggest day ever in the Ghost Chutes, we banded 4,685 raptors in a single season, 1994. And we had 5 banding stations operating simultaneously.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say. So now we run 1 banding station full-time, occasionally 2 when we have enough people. And over the years, I've heard so many stories from really long-term members and donors who'll say, oh my gosh, I used to take 2 weeks off every year and just go hang out with Steve at the Ghost Chutes. So can you paint a little bit of a picture of what the Ghost Chutes was like there? Because the crew now is incredibly jealous that they don't have their own cook. Yeah. So thanks for ruining that for us from a budget perspective.
It really was a community up there. And during the peak, which was the early to mid 90s, and this was a wilderness study area, BLM wilderness study area. So we actually probably were pushing the limit of what we could do in a wilderness study area during the peak, with 25 to 30 people up there for the whole season, and having a hired cook. And having 5 stations that we operated every day. I'll never forget that one day, that 3-day period in 1994, we banded 900 birds in over a consecutive 3-day period. And so that was That was something and each banding station in some cases was banding well over 100 birds each of those days. It was crazy, but this was it's turned out to be the biggest flyway known for raptors anywhere in the interior western part of North America.
Yeah.
When I called BLM up and I said, hey, I think I'm going to find the largest flyway for raptors in the West, they thought I was nuts. But then when we went up there and documented it, they jumped right in to help us with helicopter support and all, because it's a logistic challenge, because there was not even a trail up there to the top. We had to build a trail. Andy White here in Salt Lake City built that trail in the fall of 1981, I believe he built the trail, and maybe it was 82. But until then, we were just bushwhacking up there. And we used a helicopter to get pigeons and water and everything else up there for the season, and it was crazy.
I think sometimes when I hike the go shoots that I might die, and then I get to the top and I think, I'm so glad that I didn't, because this is so spectacular. And then I start advocating for like donkeys. Like I feel like we should be able to
I'd say
take donkeys.
of all the sites that I've founded and been to in the West, I missed the go shoots the most, as well as right behind it would be the Wellsvilles.
Yeah.
Because that was the first
which is
one.
the other really difficult site to get to. Logistically, it's really hard to run. The hike is not a
3,200
treat.
vertical, 3.5 miles one
Yeah,
way, steep
yeah.
as can be.
Yeah, it's not. And they didn't get a helicopter.
No.
So
no,
they
no.
were packing it all up.
Yeah, and we sometimes hired horses to help haul stuff up.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I want for the go shoots. I would be there every weekend if I could take a donkey to the top.
Yeah.
So as you well know, and as I well know now, sitting in the seat that you kind of once sat in a few years ago, it's really expensive to run a network. It's expensive to run one site, let alone 7 or 8 or 9, as we've had at some points during our history. What's the value, and why do you feel like it's so important to have that network rather than having an individual site like most of our other HawkWatch partners have?
Sure. Well, the banding results helped us to understand the flight patterns of the birds in the fall migration. And what we learned was there's basically 3 flyways: a Rocky Mountain Front Flyway, an Intermountain West Flyway, and a Pacific Coast Flyway. And so if we're going to understand regional changes in populations and the regional health of these birds across flyways and across latitudes, we needed to set up multiple sites so we could tease all that out. And I felt like at a minimum, we should have one site in each flyway in the northern latitudes, one site in each flyway in the mid latitudes, and one site in each flyway in more southern latitudes. And that would mean 9 sites. Mm-hmm. So I was really highly motivated to find sites and to establish new sites to build that network so that we could understand flyway changes in populations, regional changes in populations, and now with climate change being a major issue globally, and increased desertification and drought and all that, there's the possibility of birds shifting flyways and shifting their migration routes depending on food availability and weather patterns, wind direction, and all that. And so for us to tease all that out, we really needed to look at as many sites as possible. I mean, if you think about it, the East and Midwest, actually, there's like 100 sites. So if there's 100 sites in the East, we should at least, create 20 or 30 sites in the West. Certainly at least 10 was my absolute minimum goal was the 9 sites I had just mentioned, but I wanted to actually do more than that. So I felt like we really, to get a handle on geographic uniqueness of population change and health throughout the West, we needed multiple flyways and multiple sites at different latitudes as well. And I think we actually need to move north and do more sites in Canada and Alaska, northern Canada too. So especially as climate warms up and the permafrost melts and habitats up north change so drastically, we need to get a handle on that as to what's going on in these northern climes.
I always wondered where Corpus Christi fit into that.
Well, it didn't.
Yeah.
And the reason why I established both Corpus Christi and Smith Point in Texas was because these were the largest flyways for Raptors known anywhere in North America, period, at the time. And we didn't really get going in Veracruz, Mexico until the early 90s. And so these were sort of done haphazardly in Texas until I said, okay, let's fund these and let's make it these HawkWatch International sites. It's too important. And we ended up also creating a site in the Florida Keys for the same reason. We had this unique opportunity to increase the size of the network and the geographic range of the network. These sites that were not going to be covered unless HawkWatch stepped up to do it. And so in my last years at HawkWatch in the late 90s, and mid 90s, I was able to get these projects going in Texas, and then at the very end, before I left the Florida Keys. And I think they also added an important component to the network because there were huge holes and there were huge flyways.
Yeah. There's something really spectacular about going to Corpus Christi. And if you're a birder in general, not just a raptor biologist or a raptor watcher like we are, it's just, there's nothing like it. Everyone tells the stories, and you can imagine and visualize in your mind what, 100,000 birds flying through in one day looks like. But once you're there and you see it in real life, and it's the coordination between the counters and the communication and how they are counting with the clickers, and they've got spotting scopes, which we don't use at any of our other sites. And it's just a really unique place, and it's so flat. When you go from like the go shoots to Corpus Christi, it's like going to a different world.
It is a different world.
But it's just such a wonderful place, and the hummingbirds and the shorebirds and all of that other diversity that you get to see when you're there.
Painted bunnings.
Yes.
There's so much diversity there.
And what are the little mammals called? Are they javelinas?
There are javelinas down there.
That kind of wander around the site, and they're just eating apples and things off the ground, and it's such a really unique, fun place, and such a, one of my favorite things about being at HawkWatch and about fall migration is the camaraderie that's created in the season. And Corpus is a really special place for that too, because they have just this really committed community of people that love what they're doing and love being there. So it's really spectacular. So one of the other things that's really great about Corpus and about our other sites is the education component.
Right.
And so some of my favorite stories that you've told me over the years revolve around you and Gallivan traversing the West and going to shopping malls and bookstores and anywhere, and that would let you kind of come in and talk about Raptors and why they were important. And so why, even all these years later, do you think education still plays such an important role in raptor conservation and the use of live birds the way that we still continue to do 35 years later?
Sure. Well, I think actually one of the smartest things I did when I founded HawkWatch International was to make education a strong component of the mission. I mean, my initial vision for the organization was science and monitoring the populations in the wild and doing on the ground conservation of the birds. But I realized that the mission needed to be broader to get the kind of public support that we needed to create a truly sustainable institution. And so very early on, I realized that education has got to be a key component of mission. We can't just be scientists. We have to be educators. We have to do outreach. We have to inspire the next generation and the current generation. And use raptors as the ambassadors for conservation that they really are. Because a captive raptor, maybe it's injured and it will never fly in the wild again. Maybe it lost a wing. Maybe it was hit by a car. Maybe it was poisoned. Anything. But if it can't be released, why not use it as an ambassador? And they still, a wild raptor is still wild in captivity.
Yes, they are.
And they retain that wildness. And all you need to do is walk into a classroom with this, magnificent, majestic raptor that the kids can see up close and personal, and look at the eyes of those children just be totally enamored with that bird and feel that connection to nature. That's irreplaceable.
Yeah, agreed. I think,
and it will take public support if we're going to achieve our conservation goals.
Yes.
We can't do it just sitting in our academic office, or publishing our scientific papers or any of those things. We have got to reach out, and we've got to change the world through outreach with live raptors that can inspire people for taking this conservation challenge seriously.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think one of the things that you and I have in common is we've had this really wonderful ability to raise our kids in conservation. We each have one son, and I know they come from different generations. Yours is now an adult, and mine's not quite 10 yet. But that's been one of my favorite parts of my job, is being able to take him with me in the field and exposing him to nature and to wildlife and to conservation and the value and the role that we each play. And like putting a bird in his hand, right? Seeing like a little tiny flammulated owl curled up in the palm of his hand is like, it's like you said, it's life-changing, not only for him, but for me too. So what do you think now as an adult, do you think your son still values that experience of his life? And how do we keep encouraging kids to be invested in conservation and wildlife?
Well, first of all, my son definitely, he may not remember the details of when he held, a little merlin or sharpshin in his hand at the age of 2 or 3 years old. But I think it's made a permanent mark on him, and he's definitely passionate about conservation. He loves to be outdoors, and so I think it reached him at an early age, and it stuck. And he feels as connected to nature as I do, I think, and as anybody could be.
Yeah.
And I think his personal experience with birds in the ghost shoots and other places was part of that. And I think actually what you bring up is the importance of reaching children very early in their lives to connect them with nature. I actually didn't feel the strong connection to nature that I was probably born with somehow until I went up to Hawk Mountain, and then later a few years later went to the Everglades and realized just how in love with birds I was, and how much I wanted to spend my career protecting nature. And also experiences in Yellowstone helped to nurture that as well at the age of 19. But I think the younger the better. And the kids are so impressionable, and I think all children really have the potential to become avid conservationists if they can just get out of the urban setting and get exposed to nature, either in the classroom or out in the field, or preferably both.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think there's a better tool to introduce people to the natural world than a wild captive raptor, like that does retain its wildness and is just extremely fascinating bird that I think people, there's a lot of people in love with raptors. It's not just you and me.
It's true.
It's I think they capture everyone if you just give them that chance, give them that exposure. And so I'd like to see HawkWatch get into every classroom, with a live raptor, because it's an important part of the mission, and it's really the only way we're going to protect these birds long term is if people care about something if they have personal experience with it, and people that have come up to the ghost shoots and had a chance to release a wild bird, that is another experience they will never forget. Not just a bird in the classroom. And I think one of the things that I tried to do with HawkWatch from the very beginning is really give people an opportunity to get close up and personal with the birds, not only in the classroom, but in the field as well, and have a chance to maybe release a bird and watch us band and measure the bird and watch us capture the bird and participate in that. And I think that one of the biggest impacts of the organization is taking young people out of college or not figuring out necessarily what they want to do with their careers until they have that HawkWatch experience at a migration site, and then they are committed for life. We've done that with hundreds, many, many hundreds of young people that were still developing their career aspirations, and we hit them at the right time and inspired them, and now look at how many of those have actually pursued their careers in wildlife and very successful careers.
Yeah, I meet people every year, partners, new contacts that we're making as we expand and grow, and they're like, oh, I did a season at the Go Shoots, or I did a season at Bonnie Butte, or and I love that. Again, I feel like the Fall Migration Network has really created this camaraderie in the raptor world, and I think there are very few people, like you said, who have these successful careers in raptor conservation today that don't have some connection to HawkWatch, even if it's just visiting the Go Shoots, or visiting any of our other migration sites. So 35 years in, we've done a lot of things. We still have a lot of work to do. What do you feel like are the greatest challenges facing raptors today?
Well, that's really a great question, and it's hard for me to see the future, but I can tell you right now that what I'm seeing for the future is, I think, the greatest single challenge that we all face as a species, as well as conservationists trying to protect the remaining biodiversity on this planet. But the climate crisis is number one in terms of a threat to the future of raptors and all biodiversity, because changes are occurring so fast. And we just don't know how fast all these plants and animals can adapt. And raptors can fly, which helps maybe them adapt and go to places that are developing new habitats maybe they can occupy, and avoiding places where maybe desertification has taken over and the prey isn't there anymore. So I see the climate crisis as being the greatest challenge of the 21st century and beyond. And in fact, we've got to all come together and do everything possible to limit the amount of carbon dioxide and methane that's being emitted, and move to renewables. And we've got to take it seriously. We can't put it off till tomorrow. It has to happen today, or we've got a really dismal future, and raptors have a dismal future. And so that's really, I see as the greatest challenge, and it trumps all others.
Yeah. If you had to think about, again, like 35 years of HawkWatch, where it started, where we are today, what would you think are maybe 3 of the greatest impacts that HawkWatch has made in terms of raptor conservation?
Well, I do think the network in the West is critical. I'd like to see the network grow a little more, and it did shrink a little bit after I left, and I'd like to see some of those sites being restored. And I mean, there's no replacement for the network, because that's data you can't go back and collect. You either collect it this fall, or that data is gone forever.
Yeah.
I think the educational programs have made a huge impact and really affected the culture of society throughout the Intermountain West, and I am so proud of the work that HawkWatch is doing educationally, and inviting people up to the sites, taking birds into classrooms and other places, assemblies and all that. And then I also think that the expanding work that HawkWatch is doing with nesting populations, and with trying to mitigate electrocution issues, and also mortality from wind turbines, and all those threats is also important, and also diversifying its funding base in some of those ways. I mean, I feel that one of my goals for HawkWatch has always been for it to be a sustainable organization long term. There will always be a need for organizations like HawkWatch International. And I feel that since I departed in 1999, HawkWatch International has moved in steadily toward a more sustainable organization, both in terms of its endowment as well as in terms of its programmatic diversification and its outreach into larger geographic areas, beyond local Salt Lake City area. And so I want to see that grow and expand, continue that. I don't think there's any reason why HawkWatch should be happy with the status quo. And we just really need to keep our finger on the pulse of how Raptors are doing and use them as a tool for setting priorities for conservation. And so I am like thrilled with what's happened with HawkWatch since I left. And I'm very proud of all the staff and the board members and the donors that have contributed so much to the organization. And I'm honored to still be a part of it, and I just want to thank everybody that's not only kept the dream alive but strengthened it and made it more powerful for a sustainable future for all of us.
I imagine it's interesting to look back from 35 years to today when you kind of started on your own, and now all these years later we have 16 staff, including staff throughout the Western United States and even in Africa, and hundreds of volunteers, and
reaching tens of thousands of children.
Yeah, every year.
Tens of thousands every year.
And so it's a lot to be proud of. And but I do think your vision allows it to keep growing. And I think, when I first started at HawkWatch, I started like right at the 2009 recession. And I thought for sure, like, oh, good heavens, I've taken this job and tomorrow they're going to like close the doors because there's no money coming in.
I really fully believe that HawkWatch is here for the foreseeable future.
I think
so too. It must be, and it will be.
Yeah.
And people like you and all the staff and board members and donors are making that, I think a realistic expectation. And that's my expectation personally as well.
Well, and I think so too. I think, the other thing that I'm so proud of with HawkWatch is I feel like so many organizations have an incredibly charismatic founder like yourself. I've often told you that you could probably start your own cult of Steve Hoffman because people just flock to you. But I think, I love that 35 years later, you're still a part of the organization. And I don't think that happens all the time.
No.
I think when a founder leaves, they cut their ties and then have nothing to do with the organization ever again. And so I love that we still have this relationship with you, and you get to be a part of what we're doing, and we still rely on you for direction and advice sometimes about where we should be going and how we're doing.
It is still in my mind, in many ways, it's a child for me. It's probably, if I look back on my career, it's my single greatest contribution to conservation of the continent and the planet. And if I can continue to inspire others, I'm going to do it as long as I have the ability to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I have the luxury, of course, of talking to lots of people all the time about HawkWatch International and what we're doing, and being able to say thank you for their generosity and support. And I'm often asked, well, what's Steve doing? And they love to hear that we still talk to each other and that what's happening and we know what's happening in your life. But I think everyone would love to know like what you're doing right now. What's your new adventure in life?
Well, there's actually, two things that I'm focused on right now and probably will be for the next decade or longer. And one is, of course, is being part of the HawkWatch International network by continuing to raise funds for and hire observers and execute the Bridger Raptor migration project, which I started back in 1991, and continue to enjoy hiring new observers and mentoring them and shepherding them through the season every year. So that actually is a very significant part of what I do, is the Bridger project every year, because it's 20 miles from where I live in Bozeman, Montana. And so I really love being a part of HawkWatch in that way. The other issue for me is I decided, I've spent my entire career, working except 10 years with the government and then 30 years with nonprofit organizations, of which HawkWatch International was probably the greatest single effort of any of them. 12 years with HawkWatch, but I decided I wanted to spend more time in the field and enjoying birds and traveling, and also sharing my passion for nature and conservation with others. And so I started my own birdwatching tour company, which was primarily going to be an international tour business, but the pandemic kind of put a lid on that the last couple of years. So I've started to do more trips into Yellowstone Park and into Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge and around Bozeman and throughout southwestern Montana, but with Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks also being a component as well, because everybody wants to see those parks and enjoy the wildlife, the wolves and the grizzly bears, as well as the birds and the raptors. So Maryland Birding and Nature Tours, marylandbirding.com is my organization, and I've been doing trips to the Veracruz River Raptors site and trying to help support the ongoing monitoring and education work they're doing down there, which HawkWatch played a major role, along with Hawk Mountain and a local regional nonprofit conservation group in Mexico, to establish that site in 1991. The largest flyway for raptors on planet Earth is known in Veracruz, Mexico, and we go down there to enjoy that every fall. I'd love to have people come along on that and help support the project, because the only sustainability of their funding is through tours now. So that tour company, I hope to continue for many years to come, and use it to help sustain projects like the Veracruz River Raptors, as well as just explore the biodiversity of other places like Panama and Ecuador. And I eventually want to run projects tours to East Africa, probably Southeast Asia. I still want to do a trip to Alaska as well. So that's going to be my love and my passion for probably the rest of my active years. So marylandbirding.com, and if you have a place you want to go, give me a call and drop me an email. So I'd love to share my passion with everyone else, and let's travel around the world together and watch birds.
Sounds good. Let's do that. All right, are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready. I'm ready for anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What's your favorite raptor?
Golden eagle.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you had one so quickly. I hate that question.
Yeah, no, it doesn't bother me at all. I have a lot that are real close to that. Goshawk is right up there. Ferruginous hawk is also right up there. What a regal raptor,
Yeah. Oh, okay. Favorite HawkWatch site?
Well, that's a hard one. I mean, I have to say that just for the memories, I think the debate is really just between the Goshutes and the Wellsvilles, and I have to put the Wellsvilles first, really, because it was the first site. It really led to everything else.
Yeah.
If I hadn't found the Wellsvilles, HawkWatch International would not exist. Yeah. But neither would it exist if it wasn't for finding the Goshutes.
Sure.
So there was a 1-2 punch there.
If you could be any raptor, what would you be?
Well, I would actually probably be a golden eagle. And the reason why is because golden eagles are extremely adaptable. They eat a great variety of prey items. In fact, Kent Keller here in Utah, who's visited hundreds of golden eagle nests over a period of 40 years or longer, and he's accumulated over 120 species of prey items in golden eagle nests. So if any species can find prey and survive, it's the golden eagle. They really have adapted well, but not well enough because they're declining. But they're species that I'm all so enamored with, and I would love to be a golden eagle in my next life.
Me too. What's your favorite field meal?
Well, I really do like fish and crackers and cheese. And actually, I used to get kippered snacks all the time, and use, little cans of herring.
Yeah.
And eat them with crackers and cheese and stuff. But I just found this really, really cost-effective, these cans of sardines at Costco. And now I'm on to them. And so I take them out.
Costco sardines and crackers.
Yeah.
And some cheese.
And some cheese, yeah. And chocolate.
Well, of course.
I like the dark chocolate, too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, those are some of my favorite field meals,
What's your best hawk watching ID mistake?
Well, that actually is the easy answer. I love that question, by the way. I was once co-leading a trip in Arizona, out of Tucson, Arizona, with the Tucson Audubon Society. And I was the Raptor expert. This was like the late 80s. No, actually it was the late 70s, because I was still... I was working for the Bureau of Land Management in Safford, Arizona in those days, okay? But I'd already started counting in the Wellsvilles, and I was well known as a Raptor expert in a lot of places. So they invited me to co-lead a trip to focus on the Raptors of southeastern Arizona. And so we had this one bird perched on a post, and we got the scope on it. And I just took a glance at it, and I saw a belly band. So I just thought, oh yeah, it's just a red tail. Yeah, it looks like a red tail. Yeah, take a look. And of course, it turned out to be a prairie falcon. And I was so embarrassed. I felt like a complete idiot. Here I am, a Raptor expert, and I just didn't look at the bird fully. I saw the belly band. I didn't look at the whole bird and see the light head and the slimmer frame and all that stuff. And adult prairie falcons sometimes show a fairly distinct band across the belly, exactly look like a red tail, but I didn't look at the whole bird. I just saw the band and just made a quick second ID, and then I was like, wanted to go hide under a rock the rest of the day because I felt so embarrassed by that mistake.
That's the best story I maybe have ever heard.
But I have a lot of others, but that's the one that sticks into my mind the most.
This one might be
because we all make mistakes.
Well, sure.
I'm human, just like everyone else.
This one might be a little harder. What's your favorite hawk watching memory?
Actually, that's. I love these questions. Yeah, I mean, there's actually no doubt about it. But I'm going to tell you two.
Okay.
The first one is the first day up in the Wellsvilles, when 150 hawks flew by in 3 hours. We didn't get there till 1 o'clock, and there was already, the sky was just filled with hawks. They were just streaming by. And see, I'd been looking for 3 years for a fall site after moving from Pennsylvania to Logan, Utah to start graduate school. And I hadn't really found a site that produced more than just a handful of birds. But I always wanted to try the Wellsvilles, but finally it took till 1976 to finally get up there. And we got there at 1 o'clock. It was mid-September. And there was a hell of a flight. And we just counted them up. We counted 150 birds in 3 hours. And then we stayed the next day and also counted a pretty good flight. But that one, I will never forget that time. And of course, the other one was the first day up at Hawk Mountain. And seeing, literally 4,000 birds in, 6 hours. And just, falling in love. I mean, it was such an impact on my life and my career and my world. It was changed forever at that point.
Well, it's such a spectacular landscape also when you're sitting up there.
Yeah.
It's just really special.
Yeah. I mean, I also had some amazing days in the go shoots where I had over 1,000 birds come by. And I had amazing days in the banding station in the go shoots where I banded well over 100 birds in a day. And I think in an hour once I caught like 30 Cooper Sox in an hour.
Oh, wow.
And at the West Station. And it was just crazy. And I just loved every minute of it.
It's such a thrill. That feeling is such a
And
thrill.
actually, as long as you didn't ask this question, I'll wish that you did. And probably one of the most memorable banding experiences I ever had was in the early years. I think it was the first I think it was the second season I was up there, 1981 in the Go Shoots. I just on a whim, I set up a mist net in front of the Pigeon in West to see if I could catch some birds coming into the Pigeon instead of leaving or going into the bow net. And of course, the first bird in was a golden eagle.
Of course, into your mist net.
Yeah, and it just ripped it to shreds. But I was so fast getting out there to grab that bird that I got it. I mean, the net was destroyed, but it was so tangled up in the net, it couldn't fly away. And even though these nets are built for sharpshins and Cooper's hawks and maybe red tails, but not golden eagles, no. We caught and banded that bird.
Wow.
And that was a $40 net that was gone forever. And I never did that again. But I learned my lesson quickly.
Well, true, and that was a $40 well spent.
Yeah.
Because when you catch a golden eagle in a net at a migration site, I don't care where you are at the site, everyone stops what they're doing.
Well, and here's the thing.
Count doesn't stop. If Dave is watching this,
it would have been a perfect opportunity for me to get footed by a golden eagle.
Sure.
And I didn't get footed. And that was a miracle in itself, because I was able to extract that bird, and it was really on its way out. I just basically grabbed it at the last second before it flew away, and you know, the bird was perfectly healthy and the net was trashed, but you know, it was a unique experience.
Well, that's an understatement. So Steve, I can't thank you enough for coming here to me and for spending the time and sharing your story and your passion. It's so contagious and consuming, and I love it, and I love all the time I get to spend with you, so thank you.
It's my pleasure.
You're gonna make me cry. It doesn't take much. Like, we're gonna both cry. And that's the way to end an interview. Barbara Walters has nothing on us. Like, we have nailed it.
Well, it's my pleasure, my honor to be here and to be a part of HawkWatch for this opportunity to celebrate the 35-year anniversary, and to just to feel close to the organization that I was honored to create. And it's I consider it to be probably my life accomplishment is to create this sustainable institution and bring joy to so many people, and to make every effort to support the organization in continuation of its important, critical work.
Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, and thank you for doing it.
There's Steve, and someone else joined us from a phone number. So just let you know, we can see that you're here. We're glad that everyone joined us. My guess is we'll probably have a few more people kind of popping in and out as we go, but let's get right to it. If you have a question that you've been dying to ask Steve Hoffman for years, now is your chance.
I want to thank you for doing the interview, Steve, for starting HawkWatch. I was crying during the interview, so I was glad to see you and Nikki crying too. I've been able to be a part of HawkWatch for a little bit of time, and it's been really a great part of my life, and for my children too. I took him to the Go Shoots when he was in 4th grade. I wasn't sure I was going to get him up the mountain, but I did. And his freshman year of college, he called me in the middle of the day. He's like, "Mom, guess what?" And I couldn't figure it out. And the way his dorm was situated, there was a courtyard in the middle, and he'd seen a red-tailed hawk fly in and grab a squirrel and start eating it. He was so excited. So that's thanks to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments and for your participation in the organization.
Mhm.
David, any questions down in Tubac?
I don't know. We were just talking maybe before Steve, you came on that we live in Tubac, and the HawkWatch in March, right in the little park there, seeing the zone tails and the black hawks and the black vultures has been really exciting. And we had
Nice.
hoped one day to make it up to the go shoot. So I guess there's still time for us to try that.
You should go. Good.
Yeah. And
Where's the Texas sign?
oh, and also we haven't made it to Corpus Christi yet, but that sounds like a great experience from how you're describing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'll never forget it.
I have a question for you.
Sure, Janet. Yeah.
When I've been to the go shoots, as Nikki said, she'd always heard about how large the setup was, the private cook and all of that. You not only managed that, but you managed developing the whole network for HawkWatch. And I'm just wondering how you did that. I mean, it's really a huge undertaking. And you're right, the network has shrunk to a certain extent, especially by the number of banding stations at the go shoots and whatnot. But how'd you do it?
Well, I guess the first thing is I had a lot of help.
Mhm.
And a lot of, really, people like Carol Hallett and so many others did volunteered every year to make it happen. And BLM did a tremendous amount to help us. And you add a little ambition on top of that, and it all worked out. But I will tell you, in the early years of HawkWatch, I did not sleep much at all.
Right.
I pretty much, I was driven. I was driven to succeed. I was driven to get this thing in a stable, sustainable, be a sustainable organization. And I wasn't going to quit until the job was done. And so I just put every ounce of energy I had into this passion that I had. And I had a lot of people tell me I couldn't do it and that I would fail. And all that did was motivate me further.
Right.
And try harder. And I was young. I had the energy.
That's
I
important.
had the vision. And I mean, if there was an obstacle, I figured out a way to overcome it. And like I said, I had a lot of help from a lot of people, board members, volunteers, donors. But yeah, I mean, the first, I'd say 5 to 7 years, I really didn't know if the organization was going to make it, through the ups and downs of the economy. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes along the way, believe me. If there was something that could be screwed up, I would screw it up. But everything that I learned from all my mistakes, and mostly, hopefully, and we just kept at it. And I could come up with literally hundreds and hundreds of names of people that helped make sure that HawkWatch survived and prospered. And I won't try to list all those, but I am thankful to everyone forever that that helped make this thing become a reality and a really sustainable organization. And some very, very generous people also contributed tremendously financially. Otherwise, I mean, I didn't know anything about fundraising. I didn't know anything about for development. I didn't know anything about grant writing. I didn't know anything about any of this. I was a government employee for 10 years.
Right.
So I just figured it all out. And like I said, I had a lot of help, and it was a miracle. It was a miracle that it came together. And every day that HawkWatch persists is another miracle.
Mhm.
But I think it's here to stay. And people like Nikki are steering the ship in a very capable manner. And I'm sure the board is doing a superb job, as well as volunteers and donors.
Mhm.
And yeah, the miracle continues. And Jennifer, who's listening in, has been very, really remarkably supportive and generous over the years. And I could never, ever thank her enough for what she's done to help support the mission and work of HawkWatch for the last 35 years.
Mhm. That is amazing. Thank you, Jennifer, too.
So I know now who is on the phone, and they're having some technical difficulties, Julia Shaw. And so I received an email, so I want to field the question. And Carol, I saw yours too, so I promise I won't forget. But since this one's in my email, I feel like I'm more likely to forget it. So I want to get it all the way right now. So Julia wants to know, Steve, now that huge wildfires seem to be part of life, especially in the western part of the country, with all the destruction of habitats for raptors and other wildlife habitats that have resulted, are migratory habits changing, and where will raptors end up living?
Well, that's a good question, but it's a tough question to answer. And actually, I do want to say that I did a little experiment on Monday of this week to look at what the impact of wildfire smoke has on migrating raptors. And I went to a site about 80 miles west of Bozeman, where I've done some hawk watching in the past. Meanwhile, I had my observers up on the blizzards counting. And in the past, those comparison counts have been generally pretty similar in terms of numbers and species diversity and composition on any given day. Well, the day I was up at this site called Bull Mountain, there was a huge wildfire to the north and northwest, and the winds were blowing the smoke right through the flyway that I was monitoring. And I was not in the smoke. The smoke was to the north of me, so I was fine. I saw very few birds, and I think they were going around the wildfire smoke. I don't think they wanted to fly through it. So instead of counting 100 birds, I counted only 35.
Mm.
And in 6.5 hours, whereas the blizzards counted 100 the same day, but they didn't have any smoke either. So I was just south of the smoke, and the birds did not like it. I just most of the birds did not want to go through that. So back to the in terms of habitat alteration, obviously goshawk is one of the species of raptors that's being impacted greatly by the changes in our forests. And that change is primarily due to the climate crisis, because first of all, you have bark beetles surviving the winters. And so the bark beetle outbreaks are moving northward because the winters aren't cold enough to kill the beetles. And so those beetles are chewing up the forests much more than they have in thousands of years, because the temperatures are warming so rapidly. Nighttime temperatures don't get 30 below zero in a lot of places for 2 or 3 weeks to kill the beetles. And then, of course, people are so concerned about wildfires, they want to cut down more trees so there's nothing there to burn. And so logging, actually, with the excuse of trying to protect human habitation from being burned, logging is starting to increase rapidly in places to try to minimize that risk. And of course, species like goshawks, which depend on old growth forests, are not doing well. Numbers are declining, I think, throughout the West, because forest cover and old growth forests in particular forests that are 80 years old and older just barely exist anymore. And what does exist, they're likely to burn in the next few years or decades. So, I think some species of raptors are going to be more affected than others. But even if you take the grassland and sagebrush species like Pigeon hawks and golden eagles, desertification is expanding at such a rapid pace, and jackrabbit populations are crashing, and they're not recovering. And so the prey resources aren't what they used to be, because everything's drying up, and they don't have the food supply. They eat grass, and the grass is not growing when you're in drought. And then you have cheatgrass coming in, and it's an annual plant, and it dries up in late May, early June. And so the ground squirrels and the voles and so on don't really have that greenery all through the summer like they've had before, because you have this exotic grass that's taking over. After a fire goes through the sagebrush does not come back, the native grasses do not come back, and the cheatgrass just takes over, and it creates a more frequent fire cycle of every 5 to 7 years instead of once every 80 to 120 years, which is the way it used to be with sagebrush. So, some raptors are going to adapt, some not so well. But I guess the good news is there are not as many, dangerous pesticides that are persistent in the like DDT and organochlorines. I mean, there are other pesticides that are having adverse effects, but they don't seem to have the lifetime in the ecosystem, in the food chain, to have as much of an impact as what we saw from the late 40s through the early 70s with DDT and other organochlorines. So that's a good thing. Bald eagles have come back, peregrine falcons have come back. So it's not all doom and gloom. But one of the most exciting things I ever do in a year is go down to Veracruz, Mexico, and I've had to cancel my last 2 trips. But when you go down there and see the literally 4 to 6 million raptors that pass through from late August to late November in Veracruz, it helps you to understand that, number one, there's still a lot of raptors out there. They're not all dead yet. And so that gives us hope. And I think you see those kind of numbers coming through, that just tells us, we have a lot to do to continue to work, conserve them for future generations, and the biodiversity that supports them. And so,
Steve, you brought up
all is not
Veracruz.
lost. Yeah.
And so on a slightly happier note, Carol asked a few minutes ago, what time of year do you do the Veracruz trip? So maybe we could talk bird tours and what that looks like for a second.
Yeah, I mean, the Veracruz count goes from August 20th to November 20th. And the tours I run, which support the project, in fact, they could not even do the project without tourism income at this point. I try to do those tours between about the 25th of September and the 15th of October in most years. And if you go early, you get to see the broadwings. You go a little later, you get to see the Swainson's hawks. If you go really early, you get to see the Mississippi kites. I don't do it that early because it's mainly a kite migration early in the season, and I think most people want to see more diversity. So it's more in the late September through mid-October period when we get the numbers of turkey vultures, Swainson's hawks, the broad-winged hawks, and a good mix of accipiters, ospreys, harriers, and some of the more southern birds like zone-tailed hawks and black hawks and gray hawks. And also we get the water birds. We get large numbers of pelicans and hingas and ibises, and we do all the birding for songbirds too, and we visit southern Veracruz, which is the beginning of the tropical forest, and we get to see toucans and lots of cool birds as well down there. So we often see 275 to 300 species of birds on this tour, and it's a 12-day tour, and we want you all to come. Yeah. So we can talk some more. that answer that question? All right. Thanks, Carol.
I don't want to monopolize. If anybody has any more questions, they can certainly chime in. But
I have, oh,
okay, go. Let's go.
okay,
Yeah, for sure.
I thought of a question finally. Because when we're in two back in March, we see the Blackhawks coming through. How far north do they get? Do you see any in your counts in Utah, or do they not get that far north?
Yeah, Blackhawks, their range extends as far north as extreme southwestern Utah.
Okay,
They're really a southern bird, and but of course you folks are way down south there, and
Right.
and so you get to see a couple hundred go through. But yeah, we don't get any of the I don't think even the Manzanos has ever seen a Blackhawk, because they generally migrate through the valleys. They don't use the mountain upcrefts as much.
right.
But the Sandias and Manzanos do occasionally, particularly the Sandias has counted a few zone-tailed hawks over the years.
Okay.
Because they do breed a little bit north of Albuquerque. But yeah, Blackhawk is this important species to monitor, and Tubac may be the best place in the U.S. to document how that northern population of Blackhawks is doing.
Yeah, no,
So thanks for counting there.
sure, thanks.
Put up, yeah. I want to get down there and see that someday.
I feel like I have to chime in here and just mention that I just got back from Corpus Christi, and we were talking about, unusual things that happen with raptors. And I'm not sure if you all heard about the Blackhawk that ended up in Maine.
Oh, I did hear about that. Yeah.
It was a really sad story, and sad that the Raptor didn't get the help that it needed to get back on its journey and get to a better location. But so I guess it could end up in Utah, but it's not necessarily a good thing. The
Right.
bird.
Yeah, they're not really adapted to northern climates.
Carol had another question. It's a little further north. Speaking of, where might we look for a migration count site along the Pacific Flyway north of Golden Gate?
Well, actually, I actually conduct some migratory counts at a place called Cape Flattery on the northwest tip of the Olympic Peninsula. But I suspect there may be some sites also in British Columbia, but I don't know necessarily where they would be. I'd have to study the maps and look for funneling points and so on. But Cape Flattery actually turned out to be somewhat inconsistent. Had to be certain wind conditions to get a good flight, and so that was discontinued after a few years back in the 80s and 90s. But it was worth a shot. But yeah, just we weren't able to maintain it because there just weren't enough birds on a consistent basis to do the count. But that's a great question, and we'll have to pull out some maps to get a good answer. But I guess one of the points I made in my interview was the need to maybe establish more northern sites. And of course, HawkWatch has started a count in the spring at one site, Peak, in Alaska, and that would be a good project to continue, and it would be good to find some additional sites in Canada and elsewhere in some of these northern latitude areas, so we can better monitor some of these northern populations that are only counting northern birds, so we see how their populations are doing. And the worst climate crisis, of course, is in the far north. And the Arctic tundra is changing very, very rapidly with the melting permafrost, and so it'd be good for us to monitor these northern populations, like rough-leggeds and the northern golden eagles as well. So keep up that gun safe site, okay, Nikki?
Is the
You're muted.
Bonnie Butte site on Mount Hood, is that the Pacific Flyway, or?
Yes, I would consider that the Pacific Flyway. It's a little bit inland, but it's part of the Pacific Flyway. Yeah, and it is just south of Mount Hood. Yeah. That's a beautiful sight.
Yeah,
And,
we've
Carol-
done
Car-
that
One
one
time.
time and
Okay.
it was really fun, really a pretty sight.
Yeah, yeah. And I know Carol's been there a few times.
I was going to say that's Carol's stomping ground.
Yeah. But she spent a lot of time in the go shoots, I'll tell you that.
Who else has a question? I know Carol has another in the chat. I'm not, there's no shame in that, Carol. You keep them coming because they are great questions.
Mhm.
I will say, while we have a little bit of a lull, Steve, I just want to tell you while you're here so you don't forget that, you know, a lot of things have changed in 35 years. And something that has changed is technology. And something you may be kind of interested to know is that I got a message in the middle of the video. Y'all may have seen some notifications popping up. Sorry for the technical difficulties. But most of our crew were able to watch the interview live tonight. From the go shoots, from Chelan Ridge, from the Manzanos Mountains. And they were all really, really excited to be there. So.
Oh, that's great. Do you even hear me anymore?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I hit the wrong button here, I guess. And oh, there I am.
So Carol has a show and tell, and I think that has to be like worth seeing. So I'm gonna pitch it over to Carol to show us. The Go Shoot Raptor Migration Project. It's a t-shirt.
Oh, wow. That's great.
What year is that from?
That's exactly what I was going to ask Kirsten is what year is that from?
This was from the WFRC days. Oh, before it was WFRC. Excuse me, I read that wrong. So we're going like way, way back.
Oh, I remember seeing that t-shirt. Yep. When I first started at HawkWatch, we had a random box in a closet, the organization that had some cool t-shirts. It had that t-shirt. I remember that one. I think I actually have that t-shirt too, Carol, in my closet somewhere. Oh, no, not that one. It didn't say Go Shoots in Wellsville, but it had the logo on it and had the WR, whatever that. Oh, that one. That's the one I had.
Yeah.
I love that shirt. I'm pretty sure that one's in my closet still. That's so great.
Mhm.
That's
Thank you.
perfect for a story, for a night about history and reflection.
Well, it was great fun night. And I think Nikki did a fabulous job with her part of in terms of interviewing me. I felt so calm and relaxed. I was able to actually answer the questions just fine. So appreciate the opportunity to share my early experience with the organization.
So Carol had another great question that I have got to ask. So she's banded over 2,000 red-tailed hawks and we tagged around 1,000 of these and in the Portland area, and none of them have ever been seen at GGRO. A few have been seen in the Valley in California. Where are they going, Steve?
Well, I think there's a lot of the Pacific flyway birds are shorter migration populations, so they don't migrate as far. And so I would say a lot of them probably spend the winter in more southern parts of Oregon and the more northern parts of California, and then they just don't make it. And some may fly inland a little bit as well. But I would just bet that they either fly along the inland ridges and don't make it to the coast, or they don't fly as far. Their migration is a shorter distance migration because, of course, you got the maritime climate, so that they don't have to fly as far south to make it through the winter.
More questions from anyone?
I'll just say, when Steve and I sat down to do the interview the other day, we both had lots of notes that we had with us, and the nice, wonderful people who were filming it for us were trying to move the notes so that they wouldn't be in the shot. And Steve and I were both like, oh, but we need our notes. We need our notes. So we kind of tucked them down to the side, and then we never looked at them again. So it was just like sitting down with an old friend and just catching up and chatting. And it was such a treat for me. And it was so much fun. And I just, again, love every time I get to hang out with Steve and pick his brain and ask him the questions that I am eager to learn, and go from there. So I'm thrilled that we're all getting this time to chat with those, that we all, some of us know each other and some of us are new, which is really fun. Steve, I wanted to ask you one of the things that we've been talking about a lot at HawkWatch. So we've been doing banding for 35 years plus, which is really fantastic and has created some really great information for us over the years. But we've really, like a lot of Raptor organizations, started using telemetry more. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about telemetry technology and how that will sort of shape Raptor conservation moving forward, because we're using it all across the world. We're using it on all different sizes of birds, from hummingbirds to Andean condors. And so I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, absolutely. The opportunity to learn about movements is using, satellite telemetry, and the technology actually has improved to where we can tags on smaller birds, but so we're learning now about broad-winged hawks that we never knew anything about before, because we didn't have transmitters small enough to put on broad-winged hawks, and now we can. But yeah, I'd say the information is coming in so rapidly, and it's going to make all the difference in terms of understanding, I think, changes in movement patterns as the climate crisis continues to require that the birds may develop new migratory patterns, and we can learn about that in real time using satellite telemetry. So I see it as a extremely valuable technology for conservation of these birds, and pretty much all birds, because we'll have a better handle on how the changes, in habitats and in wind and patterns, and prey population changes. I mean, the whole jet stream thing is not working so well anymore, and so a lot of places that used to be important migratory flyways in the east are now not getting those northwest winds and the frontal passages on a regular basis, and the birds are flying in a more dispersed pattern. So really, migration counts are going to be more difficult to interpret as birds start to alter their migration patterns, and maybe on a year-to-year basis, depending on which way the wind's blowing and where the prey is, and climate changes could have a huge impact on that. So the importance of telemetry is absolutely crucial for us to keep track of what's going on with migration of raptors and other long distance migrants, because I think the change is going to be a dominating theme in what happens to our birds in the future, due to so many rapid changes with our climate and year-to-year patterns of weather. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it has so much value for wintering locations as well, as we
Yeah.
think about climate change and how birds are using landscapes differently. It's been a really useful tool for us. It's something we're expanding as quickly as possible. Unlike banding, it's a little bit more expensive
Just
to
a
buy
little.
just a little. But it's definitely worth the investment for the data that you get in return.
I have a very random question. Nikki is aware that Osprey are, I don't know if I can quite say favorite, but one of my favorite raptors. Have you ever been at a site where they're counting many Osprey? Is anybody out there really able to focus on them?
Well, I have not been to a super productive osprey migration site because most of my work has been non-coastal areas.
Right.
But there's certainly, in fact, one of the sites that has been fairly recently discovered for osprey migration is in Cuba.
Oh,
A lot of the ospreys going down the East Coast, down through the Florida Keys, and they leave the Keys and fly to Cuba. And then from Cuba, they actually do one of two things. They can either go more southwesterly and hit the mainland, maybe even the Yucatan Peninsula, or they may just continue on to South America and places like Venezuela. A lot of our northern osprey populations do overwinter in South America.
okay.
And Central America, and so and the satellite radios are being put on ospreys in the West now, and we're getting some interesting results. Some birds may winter in Texas, some birds may winter in Nicaragua, and some birds do go all the way through to South America. And actually, a friend of mine sent me a track of an osprey over a period of about 3 years now. And this osprey still seems lost. It goes a different wintering place each year. I think this year it's in Louisiana right now, and other years it's been in Texas and in Mexico, and it was tagged or the transmitter was put on in the Bitterroot Valley, just south of Missoula, Montana, and the birds ended up in northern Idaho and all over the place. And it's a track that I wish I could I could forward it to everybody and you could see it, but it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But as far as concentrations of ospreys, I do think the Atlantic coast is the best place to see them. And there's sites like Maine, New Jersey gets a lot of ospreys. There's a site in Virginia that gets quite a few. And then the Florida Keys probably gets some of the highest numbers along with peregrine falcons. Florida Keys gets some good numbers of ospreys. So yeah, and Veracruz gets quite a few osprey too. It gets I think a couple thousand.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my butcher site here in southwestern Montana, well, our record count for ospreys is 22 birds.
Okay.
It's not a big osprey flyway. In fact, last year we didn't count a single one.
Okay.
But this year we're up around, I think, 14 or 15 ospreys.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
sure.
Carol is wondering if that osprey, the wandering osprey, do we know if that's a breeding bird?
No, it hasn't bred yet. It's a young bird. And so it has yet to breed, and it's still trying to figure out where it wants to go or what it wants to do, and maybe it hasn't found a mate. So that's a very good point, Carol, and it's very likely eventually, hopefully, settle down somewhere. But we have yet to see where that will be. I think it's like 3 years old now. So it's been going back and forth. And of course, ospreys don't migrate north in their second spring or their first adult spring, they stay south for 18 to 20 months and migrate as 2-year-olds. So I think this bird might be 4 years old, but yeah, Carol, I'll send you the map. I'll email it to you. You'll be intrigued. Absolutely intrigued. So one question I've had about ospreys is whether or not the increase in bald eagles we've seen over the last 35 years is having any impact on osprey populations, because as you know, eagles like to practice pirating fish from the ospreys. Ospreys are much better fishermen than a bald eagle is. Ospreys catch fish up to 18 inches below the surface of the water, whereas bald eagles can only catch fish within 6 inches of the surface of the water. And so bald eagles just sit around, wait for ospreys to catch the fish, and then they steal it because they're much bigger birds than ospreys. And then the osprey just goes back out and catches another fish. So I've heard some arguments for and against whether or not ospreys are being impacted by the increase in bald eagles, but I guess the jury's still out. But I would say that there's no real strong evidence at this point that it's a major factor.
Okay.
Because ospreys are so efficient at catching fish, they catch fish about 35 to 40% of their dives into the water. They come out with a fish. And most raptors, their success rate is more like 10 to 15, maybe 20%. They miss maybe 4 times out of 5. Well, ospreys, have upped the ante on that, more like 2 out of 5 they catch a fish. So it's pretty cool. They're pretty good at what they do.
Yeah.
So we never got this person on the phone. Did they want to ask any questions?
We did. So that's Julia, and she asked you that question about wildfires.
Okay. Yeah.
And Julia, I sent you a reply with my cell phone. You're welcome to email me or text me any more questions. Definitely want you to be able to participate. And Jennifer, we know you're there. If you have any questions, happy to take them.
We'd love to hear from you, Jennifer. And thanks for coming.
Well, we have still 10 minutes on the clock. So, I mean, this is your opportunity, everyone. I don't want you to miss out. You can ask for the second worst ID mistake.
There you go. I like that.
Well, I would rather not dwell on my mistakes, actually.
Good point. Good point, Steve.
I was good. You noticed how quick I was to answer the question, though. I knew right away the one that I was most embarrassed about in my entire lifetime, because I had a large group of people with me, and it was I mean, I mistook it for a very common bird. In front of everybody, I made a fool of myself. So
I think it helps everyone when the people that you look up to make mistakes also. So I don't think that you probably made a fool of yourself as much as you maybe made everyone else recognize, like, it's okay to take that extra few seconds and make sure that you're looking at all the right spots and marks.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a question, Steve. Kind of going the other way. What raptor, completely out of its common finding, is the one that surprised you the most? I guess, what raptor did surprise you the most of its location being out of place?
you mean like out of its range, or?
Yeah, out of its range, right.
Well, that's a great question. I guess one of the things I could mention is for almost the entire history of our knowledge of hook-billed kites, it was thought to be a resident bird and never migrate. And of course, hundreds are counted every fall in Veracruz. So that was a finding that we didn't expect. And then the other thing is in Veracruz, we've seen bald eagles, golden eagles, ferruginous hawks, all of which it's really out of their known range. That far south, they don't nobody knew that they migrated that far, and of course they don't. But a few birds did, and so they were way out of where they were supposed to be. And I will never forget the ferruginous hawk because it's a rare bird anywhere. There's only probably 2,000 pairs of ferruginous hawks left on planet Earth, and here this ferruginous hawk comes right down the Gulf Coast of Veracruz, Mexico, flies right over our head. And was with Ernesto Ruelas, who actually is co-founder of that project, and so he and I could validate what we were seeing together, and it was quite a memorable experience because I don't think they've had any other ferruginous hawks ever confirmed anywhere in Veracruz, Mexico. I guess that answer your question, David?
That's great. Yeah, that's exactly what I was wondering about, because that sometimes when you're birding is the thing you remember about a particular trip is what is that bird doing there, and that's always fun.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So Carol has another great question more on the banding front. I think these are so great. What color pigeon do you suggest for adult red tails?
Sure. Well, of course, I'm a kind of aficionado of pigeon color because I ended and trapped many thousands of hawks and negotiates over the years. But I would say that if it's an adult red tail, I would suggest a gray pigeon with white under the wings or light gray under the wings. For an immature red tail, they're not as smart, and I think a white wing on a pigeon, it shows more of a flash, and they're more likely to see it sooner and really key in on it. And I think that kind of movement, flash at the tip of the wing of white, I don't think they can resist that, Carol. What color pigeons do you use at the airport? She's not going to answer that probably.
I have a question, and we didn't talk about it during our interview at all, but there was a period of time when crews at the Manzanos and the Goshutes trapped flammulated owls at night, obviously, which we don't typically do at migration, and we certainly don't do anymore. We have a separate project now studying small forest owls in breeding season. But I'm curious what the reasoning was behind that and why the focus on flammulated owls and not other small forest owls that are found at our migration sites.
Well, my understanding is that it actually was not a focus on flammulated owls. It was just all owls that were migrating through that site, at night. And so, for example, I know in the Manzanos, saw-whet owls were captured, and in the Goshutes as well, saw-whet owls were captured, and I think there might have even been a few long-eared owls captured, and yeah. So one of the things about flammulated, maybe this is why you folks are now studying them during the nesting season, is they are highly migratory compared to many owls. They are highly dependent on moths. which climate change is having an impact on, because of course, the moths can now reproduce sooner in the spring, and so and they may become less active earlier in the season, the summer season. So the flammulated owls may have to migrate sooner due to food shortages in the early fall. So there's a lot of reasons to study flammulated owls, and they're not a particularly common bird. Also require very, very specific habitat requirements for nesting, primarily ponderosa pine, old growth ponderosa pine forests. They will also occur in some mixed conifers, but ponderosa pine is really their primary forest type. And you know, they don't have a hugely expansive range in North America either. They haven't really been studied that well. I mean, more recently there have been some studies, but you don't see a lot of there's not a lot of scientific literature on the flammulated owl. I'm actually glad you folks work on that owl during the breeding season. I think you might come up with some very interesting findings over the years. So congratulations for doing that, Nikki and staff.
Yeah, it's great. We're learning a lot. We're studying flammulated owls primarily in Utah, and then we have a site in the Chiricahuas where we're really looking at flammulated owls, but also elf owls and whiskered screech owls, which are have even less literature than flammulated owls, which is not very much at all. I think there's maybe one publication on whiskered screech owls known, and so we're really eager to study them and tie that back to, like you were saying, climate change, especially those really small forest owls that are cavity nesters, but also really dependent on insects.
Yeah. Now, how long have you been doing the work in the Chiricahuas, Nikki?
For this will be our 5th year this next nesting season.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I was not aware of your work in the Chiricahuas, so I got to pull my head out of the sand and figure out what all you're doing.
Yeah, talk to Dave. It's one of Dave's projects, and it's spectacular. It's one of my favorite places to visit. It's really a cool spot.
Yeah,
we'll just get you down there. That'll be that. So we'll just have to get you down there.
Yeah, actually, one of the first places in the West I ever visited was the Chiricahua Mountains. When I was a sophomore in college in eastern Pennsylvania, I had the opportunity to take a 1-month mammalogy class in the Chiricahua Mountains in the winter. And so I was there in the month of January, trapping small mammals in the desert right near the mouth of Cave Creek Canyon.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I know exactly where that is.
We stayed in that
the Southwest Research Station.
Well, we didn't stay in the research station, but we stayed near it, right at the mouth of the canyon there.
Yeah, we stay at the research station, and it's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's great. You have scientists from all over the world coming to study all of the diversity. The bugs there are phenomenal. The bats, the birds, the reptiles. We could talk about the Chiricahuas forever, so we can.
Yeah,
I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, I will never forget. I begged my professor to allow me to do an overnight backpack trip in the Chiricahuas before we left for the season, and he acquiesced. And I'll really never forget that backpack trip. It was just one night, and I remember a raccoon came to visit me in the middle of the night and stole some of my food. But it was a great experience, and there was snow on the ground, but it wasn't a lot of snow, and it was just a gorgeous hike and tremendous experience that I remember when I was 19 years old. Yeah.
Well, we are about out of time. We got started a few minutes late though, so I want to give a last opportunity for last burning questions. And as I do, I'm just going to provide an update that Carol uses domestic mice for her red tail work. So hot off the press, everyone.
Cool.
Any last questions for Steve, everyone? Going once?
Well,
Twice?
it's been great. Appreciate some people hanging around and having a chat with me, and I always will appreciate my strong HawkWatch International connection with the staff and owners and everyone. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm so appreciative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol,
We
Thank
enjoyed
you.
hearing your interview and hearing this question and answer session. Thanks so much.
This 35 years celebration really, I don't think would have been what it is without having you tell the story of how everything started and why we're all here today and why everyone is so passionate about this work. So thank you for being part of it.
It's an honor.